Hello everyone, my name is Ali Saifi, and in this video I am going to explain everything about CSS positions. See, in CSS we have a property called position, and understanding this position is very useful, and it could help you in so many different circumstances. So that's what we are going to do in this video, and we are going to start with some examples so that you can understand everything about CSS position. And again, once again, it can very help you in so many different circumstances. So let's just start. Let's open up VS Code and see the code that we are going to start with. See, for start, I have a nav tag here with some 5 A tags inside this, and also a little of content here. We have with bunch of P tags inside it, and again 5 divs here with a class of item, and you can see, and again a bunch of P tags here for start. This is our HTML code, because for start I wanted to have a long text that we can actually scroll, because I wanted to create a page that has a long text that we can actually scroll. The scrolling thing is why I have so many P tags here, so that we have a big area that we can actually scroll inside that. And for start, these are our 5 items here, and I have applied some CSS properties that you can see these items, just a background color and a border, nothing so too complicated about it, and a nav tag, nav bar here. This is our nav bar, and imagine this is a website, and this is the top nav bar of that website here. So, and for the CSS code, I actually let's explain a little about explain these codes, and start explaining positions, and start our real stuff. See, so I have imported a font family and applied that to my body. Set the margin to 0 for each item. We have a background color and a border so that you can see each one of these items. So see, this is each one of these items, and for the nav bar here, I have applied a display flex and a justify content center. So that's why all of these A tags are at center now. As you can see, they are at center, and a background color to the nav bar so that you can see the area. And of course, each nav link that is inside this nav bar, we have applied some CSS properties like padding, font weight, color, background color, and a hover effect for these things. So this is the code that we are going to start with, and start explaining everything about CSS properties. So the first thing that I'm going to explain is position of relative is the first thing that we are going to cover. See, when we create elements in HTML and CSS, for example, this P tag, this A tag, this div tag, every single HTML CSS element, they have a static position by default. And we are going to explain what is position static and what is the difference with other positions. But let's first start with a position of relative. See, when I come here, and for example, let's select this item 1 that we have, okay? When I come here and select this item 1 of ours and set the position of this item to relative, okay? At first glance, we may think that nothing happens. If we come back here, hit refresh, we can see, and we see no change, and it seems that nothing happened. Well, when we set the position of something to relative, what happens is 4 new CSS properties will be unlocked for that thing. Those properties are top, right, bottom, left. For example, when I say top 20 pixels, so now that we have set the position to relative, this top 20 pixel is now unlocked for this thing. Before that, this top 20 pixel was meaningless for that. And again, when we say top 20 pixel, it means go ahead and have a 20 pixel space from top. Or even if you say bottom 20 pixel, it means go ahead and have a space from your bottom 20 pixels. So you may think, okay, what is the difference with margin? We could have done that with margin as well, right? For example, you may think, okay, we now set bottom 20 pixel, and what if we used margin bottom for that one? What if? Well, the point is, it's actually very different with margin what we just did. See, here, when I say, for example, let's increase the bottom from 20 pixel to, for example, 100 pixel, a big number so that we can understand it better. See, what happens is, when I say bottom 100 pixel, it now has a space from its bottom's 100 pixel, but there are now two layers inside this. This element now is on top of another element. But if we use margin, something like this would never happen, because when we use margin, it pushes the other element around it. For example, if we use a margin, for example, top 100 pixel, and remove this bottom 100 pixel that we have, what happens is, you can see now it pushes the other items around it. And so what happens is, we never have something that one element go on top of another element with margin. But with this one, for example, rather than using margin top 100 pixel, now let's use top 100 pixels. What happens is, now you can see the item 1 here is now has a 100 pixel space from its top, and now the layers go on top of each other. This is something that is different with margin. So don't think that it has no difference with margin. It actually is very different with margin thing that we have. So let's uncomment this one. Let's have that bottom 100 pixel. So when we set the position of something to relative, or even when we set the position of something to something non-static, we will cover all of the possible values for position, but the default value for things is static. The position of everything is static. For example, if I comment this one out, now the item, the position of this item will go back to the default value, and the default value is actually position of static, and in position static, bottom 100 pixel is meaningless for that. So that's why if we come back here, hit refresh, nothing happens. And also, even if we hit inspect on this element, even the browser tells us. If you come here, see here, you can see this one has an info, and it says, hey, the position is static, and for a static position, this bottom 100 pixel is meaningless. In fact, since the position is static, these commands like bottom, top, right, left are meaningless for these things. So this is something to have in mind as well. So the first thing that we learned was position of relative. When we set the position of something to relative, what happens is now we can actually control the location of this item with some commands like bottom, right, left, top, so we can actually relocate that element to somewhere that we like. So this is the position relative for start. The second thing that we are going to learn is actually position of fixed and absolute. These two things that we are going to learn. See, when we assign a position relative to something, so 4 new commands will be unlocked for that. But when we say, for example, bottom 10 pixel or right 10 pixel, when we say 10 pixel from right, it goes ahead and has a 10 pixel right compared to its original location. So if this item 1 was supposed to be here, right? But now that we have applied a bottom of 100 pixel, it will be relocated compared to its original place. But if we set the position of something to, for example, let's start by absolute. This is something that I'm going to, the second position that I'm going to cover. If we set the position of something to absolute, let's first see what happens just by adding this position absolute and not other things. So also, again, for this one, these top, right, left, bottom is now unlocked for item 2 as well. Sorry, we need to apply this to item 2. Is now unlocked for this because now the position is not static. If position is not static, these 4 commands are unlocked for that. So but come here, hit refresh. What happens is we can see that the item 2, okay, has another difference with position relativity that we had. When we set the position of something to relative only alone, let's test that out. Item 3 and compare that. Position relative only alone. What happens is, let's put that for the 5th item because the 5th item is done. You can see what happens is the element 5 that we have that has the position relative, the width of the element is actually from the very left to the very right, just like what it was before. See, if you come here, hit inspect on this one, we can see that the area that this element 5 has occupied, let's make that smaller a little and come here. This is our item 5. You can see the area that it's occupying is from very left to the very right. But if you come here to item 2, you can see that the area that it's occupying is as much as text that it has. So if the text was longer, it was bigger. And so this is another difference that position absolute has. When we set the position of something to absolute, the element will lose its, if it doesn't care if the display is on block, if the display is inline block, it doesn't care about it. The position is absolute now. And when we now that the position is absolute, when we use the word top, right, left, or bottom, we are setting the top, right, left to compare to the whole page here. See, let's see for ourselves. For example, if I say top 50 pixel, okay, and for example left 50 pixel, what happens is, come here, hit refresh, you can see that now item 2 that we have a 50 pixel from top and 50 pixel from left, but compared to the whole document. But for the relative, it was compared to its original location or original placement. So this is position of absolute. And the next thing that I'm going to talk about is position fixed. See, what is position fixed? Here, the position fixed is just like position absolutely completely behaves like a position of absolute, but the only difference is when we scroll inside our document, the position fixed will stick at its place. See, let's see for ourselves. For example, for the item 3 that we have, let's use that for item 3, and we are going to use that position absolute and position fixed here. For example, we use bottom for this one, bottom, and right for this one. Okay, so let's come back here, hit refresh. So this is item 3 that we have. It's from bottom and right. As you can see, now that we scroll, the item 2 will be left behind. See, item 2 is left behind, but item 3, no, we didn't fix that on fixed. Sorry, I still was using position of absolute. I didn't change that to fixed. So let's save that, come back here, hit refresh. You can see when we scroll, item 3 is still there. As you can see, item 3 is still at the bottom right, and it won't be left out with the scrolling. But for the absolute, it's absolute. It just sticks right there and doesn't move. So this is it. The first thing that we learned was position of relative. Well, the default one is static actually, and nothing changed. Static, relative, absolute, fixed, and the next thing that we are going to learn is actual position of sticky, and the last thing is a combination of absolute and relative is something that we are going to learn. For example, this position fixed that we used is a good example. For example, have you seen some websites when you scroll and has a link here that you can click on this link here and it will relocate you to the top of the document? This is good for something like that, or for the navbar that we have. So this navbar should have a position of fixed, right? Because we want it to stay at top while we are scrolling. So we can actually come here and select. We have already selected our navbar here. We can set a position of fixed to this one, okay? But the problem is when we set the position of fixed, so the thing will be lost and it behaves like this. So to fix that, we can say actually, okay, you need to have a from your top 0 space from your top, from right as well 0, from left as well 0. So what happens is, hit refresh, this is what happens from top, right, left 0, and the position is fixed, and this is what happens. But there's something here. You can see when I am scrolling here, sometimes, see, this item 1 that we have, it now goes on top of our navbar. See here, you can see it goes on top of the navbar, or even the item 5 that we have here. See, well, that's what happens. This is something that we can actually control as well. See, there's another property in CSS called Z-Index. And this z-index is good for those circumstances when two layers go on top of each other, and we are going to determine which one do we care more and which one should go on top actually. For example, here you can see item 2 is on top of item and this thing that we have, or other things as well. So we can actually come here. So for the z-index is a CSS property that we are going to assign a value ourselves. For example, if we set the z-index of this one, for example, to 1, okay, the z-index of everything, we can consider that everything in CSS has a z-index of 0. We can imagine like this. Now that we have applied a z-index of 1 to this, the number is for ourselves. We can even use 100, we can 2, 3, anything. When I have used 1 for this navbar, what happens is we come back here, hit refresh. Now you can see that the navbar is on top of this other one, and also when we scroll, it's on top of anything else, because anything else has a z-index of 0, but this one has a z-index of 1, so that's why this one will be displayed on top of that one. So for this one, let's imagine that I actually want this one, this thing that here. Let's hit inspect on this one. And actually, let's use this thing here, the icon here, click on this icon, and I click on this so I can find that in our HTML, and this is our item 2. For this item 2, let's imagine that I want to apply another z-index, okay, z-index, and let's set the z-index of this one to 2. Okay, so what happens is now this has a z-index of 2, so that's why this one is bigger than this, so this will be displayed on that. So for the item 2, actually, I am going to use z-index of 2. So this z-index is a value that we can use any value that we like. 1, 2, 3, 100. It just depends on what we like. And what happens is anything that has a bigger z-index will be displayed on top of the other elements that we have. So this is it. So this is it. I have explained those CSS properties that I want. I am going to come back and talk a little bit more about z-index, but the next thing that I'm going to cover is actually position of sticky. See, what is position of sticky? See, in order to understand position of sticky, let's remove this position fixed and for temporary. I am going to just remove these things temporary, not for very long. When I remove this navbar, what happens is, let's come back here, hit refresh, and the element will be placed over, and that's completely normal, and that's what should happen. But imagine that this navbar that we have here is, let's imagine that we have a header here inside our website, for example, a header, and we say this is our header area, okay? And we are going to select this header that we have. So come back here, header. Let's apply a background color of, for example, let's use this one, the background. So because I want to see, you be able to see the area that it has. And let's imagine that it has a min height of, let's say 500 pixels, okay? And let's give it a display of flex, because now if I hit refresh, come here, the text is on top right. I want to center this text to put that at very center. So I hit give it a display of flex and a justify content of center for the horizontal alignment of the text, and an align item center for the vertical alignment of that text. So this is our header, okay? And this is our navbar. Imagine that for start, okay, for start, I don't want this navbar to, for start, I want this navbar to be here. But as soon as I start scrolling, as soon as I reach this navbar, I want this link 1, link 2, this navbar to start to be stick on top and remain on top when I start scrolling and go past that. If I come here, so come back here, hit refresh. If I come here and let's uncomment these things that we have. If I apply a position of fixed to this one, What happens is, if I come back here, hit refresh, it goes on top and it will go and stay on top. But that's not what I exactly want. I want it to be at its original place at the starting, but start to act like a fixed position after I scroll and past that. So that's where we use sticky. So position sticky is just like position fixed, it behaves just like position fixed, but the only difference is, let's come back here, hit refresh. The only difference is at the start, when the page is loaded at the starting moment, it just acts like a static element. So as you can see, it just acts like a static element. It looks like a static element. But as soon as we start scrolling, and as soon as we reach that element, it no longer behaves like a static element. It starts to behave like a fixed element. So this is the position sticky that we have. So this is good for so many circumstances. For example, this navbar that we have here. So this was it, and that's what I wanted to say about position static. And the last thing that I want to say is a combination of position relative and position absolute. See, imagine that let's use something here inside this section. We create a div with a class of card, okay? And let's imagine that inside this we have a div with a class of product, or let's imagine that we have a product that has an image, has a price, and we have something here, and let's use a span tag and give it a class, and give a class of off here. For example, it has a 15% off, okay? And this is our card, and let's imagine that we have a h2 tag, and this the product name. This is our product name, imagine, and we have a p tag here, and imagine this is our product description, okay? And let's see the result for now. As you can see, now we have a div here with a class of card and some values inside this, okay? So first of all, I'm going to select this card that we have, and let's move that at the end of our document here, because I wanted to have that at the bottom, because now it's next to those items. We have applied some position to things. That's why it happens. So here, so first of all, let's select this card with CSS that we have, card. First of all, I'm going to apply a margin, and a big margin, for example, 200 pixel from around, so that we can see it. And also I am going to give it a background color, not a background, just a border, so that we can see the area that it's occupying. A 4 pixel solid, for example, black. It's a very simple thing. This is our product. And imagine that the display of this thing is on inline block, and when we set the display on inline block, this is what happens. And imagine that it has a width of 250 pixels and a height of 250 pixels. So this is our card here. Imagine that someone tells us, I want you to put this 15% off at the top right of this element, at the corner of this element. So this is where we are going to learn the combination of relative and absolute. See, let's select this off thing that we have, because inside our card here, inside this card, we had a span with a class of off, right? And in order to be able to see that, let's give it a background color of red, so that we can see the area, and a color of white, a color of white, okay, and a little of padding, for example, 15 pixels. And there's something about this is a padding of 15 pixels, so this is it. And now let's imagine that I set the position of this item to absolute, okay, absolute. And I say top, okay, top 0, right 0. So what happens is, I haven't hit refresh yet. What happens is when I hit refresh, you can see that the item is on top right 0, and this is actually what should happen and what must happen. So, but if I apply a position of relative to its container, well, its container, what is its container? This is our span with a class of off. And its container is this div with a class of card. If I assign a position of relative to this one, so relative, what happens is, now this top right that I'm applying is compared to this card that we have. Hit refresh, you can see now it's not there, it's here, because now we combine the position. That's what I meant by a combination of relative and absolute together. And this is actually a quite a useful technique, and it's something that it's a technique that so many people use. So we apply a position of relative to the container, and to the child we apply a position of absolute. And now when we say top 0 or right 0, it's just compared to the card that we have. So even we can use negative values if you want. For example, negative 20 pixels. What happens is, come back here, negative 20 pixels, this is what happens. So we can actually use a combination of relative and absolute together. So this is it. This is all I wanted to cover in this video. But the last thing that I'm going to cover before I finish this video is actually it's something that I want to say about Z-Index. So let's say that and finish this video. So let's come back to our codes that we have here. Imagine that inside here, exactly inside this card that we have here. So we have that off thing that we had here. Imagine that now I have another span here, span called test1. Imagine this is our test1, and let's give it a class of test1, and another thing here, test2 here, and a test3. This is something that I am going to explain something about Z-index and finish this video. So here, let's come back here to these test1 and test1. Test1. If I apply a position of absolute to the test1, position of absolute, and imagine that I say top 0, okay, and left 0, okay, and let's give it a background color, for example, of yellow. Okay, come back, and if we come back here, hit refresh, you can see that this is our test1 here, and we do not see our test2. I zoomed a little because of course test2 is under the test1 thing that we have, right? So you may think that, okay, if I want to do something that users see the test2, I can give a z-index to test2, and now test2 will be bigger than test1, right? For example, imagine here that I select my test2 here, okay, and imagine that this one has a z-index of 1, okay, and for the test2 thing that I have z-index of, let's use, for example, 1,000 even, z-index 1,000, and give it a background color of, for example, blue. So now we may imagine that, okay, now this test2 should be displayed on top of test1 because this has a z-index of 1,000 and this has a z-index of 1, so it's because z-index is bigger. But what happens is, if I come back here, hit refresh, we can see still test1 is on top of test2. Why is that? Well, the reason is the test2 has a static position. The position is on static. We haven't applied anything to that. And z-index is meaningless for those with a static position, actually. In fact, non-static position will always be displayed on top of static positions. So in order to solve this problem, if I set the position of this one, for example, to, let's say, relative, okay, come back here, hit refresh, now test2 is being displayed on top of test1 because sure enough it has a bigger z-index. And again, if I use 1001 here, come back here, hit refresh, now test1 is being displayed. So this is something that I wanted to mention about Z-index, is actually to have in mind that Z-index is meaningless for those with static position. And of course, if you come back here, hit inspect, for this test 2 that we have, see, I have a background color blue, but for this one, even the browser is hinting that he says, hey, the position is static and Z-index is meaningless for position static. So this is it. So this is it. This is all I wanted to say in this video. So let's sum up what we learned and finish this video. So the first thing that we learned was the position relative, is that when we set the position of relative to anything other than static, 4 new commands will be unlocked for that: top, right, bottom, left. And this top, right, bottom, left will act differently and behave differently in different circumstances. For example, if we set the position to relative, so this top, right, left, it just relocates that element from its original location, okay? But if we use fixed and absolute, we saw that it's we can specify the coordinates of that. For example, top, right, 0, it's just from the whole document that we just saw, okay? And the last thing is that the difference between absolute and fixed is that, well, the absolute and fixed, they behave just like each other, they act just like each other, but the only difference is when we scroll, the position fixed will stay there and won't be disappeared, but in position absolute, they will be disappeared while we are scrolling. So this is something else that you need to have in mind. And for the sticky position was just like position fixed, but the only difference was that at the start of the page, when the page is loaded at the first moment, the element will act just like a static position, is just right there at its spot. But as soon as we start scrolling, as soon as we pass that element, it starts to act like a fixed element. So this is sticky position. And the last thing was a combination of relative and absolute. See, when we apply relative to the parent and absolute to the child, so this is what happens. We can say, for example, top negative 10 pixel or right negative 25 pixel, and what happens is that we can locate an element to its container. So this is something to have in mind. And for the Z-index, remember, the element that has a bigger Z-index will be displayed on top of the other element. And don't forget that Z-index is meaningless for static positions. So this is something to have in mind. And the last thing that I want to say is that actually you need to be careful while using positions. See, usually when those who start learning about HTML and CSS and they are actually in their big beginner phase, when they see the positions, they usually tend to use positions so much in so many different circumstances. Just have in mind there are some circumstances that using positions is actually very wrong, especially those moments, for example, for a responsive design. See, the point is just that I just want to say, be careful when using positions and make sure that when you are using positions, your result is just being well displayed in all devices, whether if it's mobile, whether if it's tablet. So have in mind that you need to be careful while using positions, because sometimes the way that we use positions could cause us to have a hard time making our website responsive, because there are some circumstances that you are not forced to use positions, and you can solve your problem just fine without using a position. And then you end up using positions, and then making your website responsive, it becomes very hard and very struggling and things like that. So this is something to have in mind. Be careful while using positions. So this is it. That's enough for this video. Hope that I managed to help you, and hope that I see you in my next videos. So see you.